Hi, welcome to day 10 of the Easter tree. Today we're going to be studying Joseph. I know it's a long stretch of scripture, and I know that not everybody has the attention span, but it's a really important story. So I would challenge you to read the whole thing. Parents, I know that your child's attention span may not last that long. So feel free to use a children's Bible that sort of modifies it and shortens it for the child. You can use a section of scripture, the part that you feel would be more applicable to your family life, or you can use resources that we used to love using. Although we read from scripture, we also love to add on Joseph, the King of Dreams. That's a great video that sort of gives kids a visual picture of what it was like. It's not completely accurate. It still gives kids an idea of what was going on during that time, gives them some bearing of the story. Another video we love is Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Of course, the Donny Osmond version. Love him. I can't resist. Go, 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 Joseph, you know what they say. Go, 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 Joseph, you'll make it someday. Sha-la-la, Joseph, you're doing fine. You and your dream coat are ahead of your time. Sorry, I had to do that. These chapters are self-explanatory, so it very much reads like a storybook. Here we see Joseph. He's 17 years old, and he is a punk. He just thinks he's hot stuff. And he is just telling his brothers that he's got dreams and they're all going to bow to him. Well, obviously, that's not going to sit well with his brothers, especially because we saw earlier his brothers' mothers are not the favorite wife. Leah's children, especially, are probably very resentful of how their mother is not as loved as Joseph's mother. So then they decide to kill him. Of course, Reuben says, let's not kill him, let's just throw him into a pit. So they do that, and then they're sold to people who then take him to Egypt. Meanwhile, the brothers take the cloak to dad and they just gives him the cloak with blood on it. How quickly Jacob is willing to believe that his son has died, which I find interesting because doesn't he believe in the covenant promise? I don't know. So then we have Joseph in Egypt. He is now a slave in Egypt. Potiphar's wife incident. I love that part because he flees. He just runs away. Now, if Potiphar really believed that Joseph was guilty, he would have immediately killed him. But we can tell that he didn't completely believe his wife. I'm sure he was aware of some of her shenanigans. Instead of killing him, he threw him into prison. He probably knew that Joseph was telling the truth. But he had to save face. I mean, you have to defend your wife. So he's in prison. This is such an important time because before that, you don't see him having a deep relationship with God. You see him pretty much a teenage punk. Here you see a bit of a transition. And isn't that the case with all of us? When we're thrown into prison, when we're thrown into a time of loneliness and despair, when we're left alone, and everything that we used to pull identity from is taken from us or it's taken to completion and then we're left with nothing. Isn't that the time when our spirit dies and then we submit ourselves to God or we go searching for him? It's such a blessed time that Joseph had in prison. And even during that time, God had favor on him. God was with him. That's such a beautiful picture of the way, even though we could be so arrogant and so rude, so prideful, God still meets us. The Lord showed him steadfast love and gave him favor. I love that. And that's true for you too. So go to him. Then you see Joseph displaying some of the talents that God has given him. Dream interpretation is one of them. I love the way throughout the whole scripture, Joseph is always pointing out that God is the one who has given him that. God alone is the source of reliable interpretation. So Pharaoh is having this bad dream. And the fact that we see the dream given twice, it just shows God, it's a God dream. God gave Joseph a supernatural wisdom. We see this in his way of being able to interpret dreams. We also see it in his skill in political economy and statesmanship. Joseph was inspired by God. He was not a magician. Did God give you talent? I hope so. I pray that you would use it and that you would cultivate it. So Joseph's role in Egypt was a lot like Daniel in Babylon. Both accepted pagan names, but they did not accept pagan religion. Joseph, in 13 years, only 13 years, he had risen from slavery to all of a sudden this very, very important role. Even that, don't you see? That's God. That's God. It's amazing. God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. See, Joseph is giving God the credit. Being alone and being whittled down to nothing, it takes you back to the truth of who you are. And then you can depend on God because you know who your source of life comes from. For I have been promised a land of my own. I couldn't resist. I love that song. It just moves me. When you're in prison and you're in the depths and you are in despair, there is nothing like crying out to God that ministers to your heart because He loves you and He will fill you and you matter to Him. He came down and He comes down and meets you in those deep, dark places after everyone has abandoned you. And this is where Joseph is. He's abandoned. He's been left alone, orphaned, and you sort of have to come to the end of yourself before you realize who's with you to the very end. And that's often when God just gives you this gift of Himself and He opens it up and He says, "Here I am, come to me. I'll meet you. I'm here with you." He's the with us God. He's Emmanuel. So take heart. Joseph is such a story of parental favoritism. And again, this parental favoritism has promoted problems and division and deception and literally the disappearance of a son. This is where we see, but God. God had a plan. He's graciously used this to achieve His good purpose. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Often we have to come through the suffering before we can have the gift of the joy on the other end of it. We tend to think the joy and the happiness and the yummy and awesome stuff should be up in the forefront. Really, it's often real joy, satisfaction, real pleasure, real happiness comes through the door of suffering. That is the truth. So now Joseph's about to be reunited with his brothers. So what's the first thing he does when he realizes that these are his brothers? He wept. He wept. You wonder, are they tears of joy? Are they tears of pain? Probably both. Wow, so powerfully painful. On the other hand, also, wow, such joy. So you see Joseph teasing out the truth. He wants to know who are these people, so he tells them that they're spies. And then in their defense of trying to prove to him that they're not spies, they start to disclose a lot of personal information. And so Joseph is very smart to tease out this personal information so that he could hear about what's going on at home and whether his father's alive. He loves hearing that he also has a biological brother. So Joseph goes through this elaborate plan because I think he wants to find out, are his brothers sorry for what they did to him, and are they changed people? Do you notice in chapter 42, verse 28, that the brother said, "What is this that God has done to us?" That's actually the first time the brothers have mentioned God. This also shows that during this time of Joseph's absence, that God was also working on the brothers' hearts. So if you're in the midst of a relationship that's fractured, you can take heart that if you continue to pray for reconciliation and you pray that God's Spirit would move, not only your heart, but that person's heart moving towards reconciliation and forgiveness. I hope that you can put that in God's hand and just keep giving that to Him and praying about that. So Joseph is now witnessing their affections. They're all reunited, and even Benjamin has appeared. He sees that his brothers really have this camaraderie and care for each other, and that they've changed and they have affection for their father. And he's testing because he wants to see, is this real, and do they feel bad, and are they going to come clean about what they did to me? So they did. He's so overcome by emotion, witnessing the brotherly affection that's taking place and the way they love and value Benjamin. I'm sure when he saw Benjamin, he saw similarities of his mother's traits and himself. He saw his father in it. I think you can liken it to the feeling where when you have a boo-boo or you've been hurt, and then you like holding it together until you see your mom. And then once you see your mom, you fall apart because you just know you can be yourself with her. She'll accept you. There's a connection there. Maybe that's something that Joseph was feeling. So Joseph is wanting to see, are they genuine in their affection for Benjamin, Or do they mistreat him like they did me? And he's kind of stirring up the pot, thinking, okay, I'm going to show favoritism to Benjamin, and I wonder how my brothers are going to respond. So you see that there truly is a change of heart, where because they are being real here in their merriment, it doesn't bother them anymore. So then Joseph provides another test, and he's wanting to see how loyal are they to Benjamin. The brothers could have just said, okay, you can take Benjamin, we'll see ya, bye-bye. But instead, you see them all come back to Egypt, and they're pleading for his life, saying, take my life instead, take me instead. And especially Judah stepping in and saying, no, take me instead. So there's also a little foreshadowing there, as it's through Judah's line where Jesus will be our sacrifice. And you see when Judah is saying this, Joseph is overcome by emotion because he's seeing they're real. They really care about him, and they really care about each other, and they really care about my father. And there has been a transformation. He just is overcome by his emotion, and he cannot control himself anymore. And he weeps aloud, so loud that everyone can hear. And I just wonder, what kind of sorrow is that when we adopted my son, Ian? And you hear this among lots of adopted parents. When the baby comes or when the child comes, there's a certain period where they're behaving themselves or they're trying to acclimate and assimilate into the family. But there will come a time, some sooner, some later, where you will hear them grieve. They will cry. They will just wail. And it's just such a deep sorrow because it's such a loss they've experienced, yet they need to let that out in order to move forward. And you see just all the pain and the grief and the letdown and just all of that, just Joseph letting it out, and he is just wailing and grieving. Because even if there is hope on this side where he's standing and there's a future, there's just so much that was lost. Yes, there's such treasures in the midst of what has happened. Of course, there's such fruit through the journey and blessings and good lessons that came out of his experience. But there's still such pain. Did it have to be that way? And you just see him crying. And then he just declares, I'm Joseph! And you just see this beautiful picture of reconciliation and reuniting and astonishment and just this process of accepting this new reality. Joseph is saying, for God sent me before you to preserve life, and God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. And I love that he just continues to give God credit. Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. And you see Joseph genuinely having a reverence and God being sovereign in his life and him acknowledging that. And I pray that wherever you are, especially if you're in the midst of suffering and you're in the midst of grief and some pain, I want you to take heart. I want you to know that God hears you and he sees you and he knows you, and he is literally a prayer away. For you to bow your heads, for you to just fold your heart towards him, to ask him for help and to cry out for him. He will hear you and he will meet you. I promise he will. That's the kind of God he is. In chapter 46, you see God directly speaking to Jacob. So God is reaffirming and making very clear in the midst of probably what Jacob is feeling is like crazy talk. He's affirming that it is indeed true and that he should take these actions and move to Egypt. Isn't that so nice of God to give that clear direction? Especially, can you imagine having to move all those people that Jacob's having to move? Ooh, I hate moving. We've had to do it so many times in our lives. I just don't like it at all. And imagine this incredible reuniting with someone you thought was dead. God is reuniting you with your son, and God, from the son's perspective, is reuniting you with your father, whom you weren't sure if he was going to be alive and you'd ever see again. It's such a beautiful picture, and it also is pointing us to what will happen with us, that we will someday be reconciled and reunited in forgiveness, where we will be with our Father and will finally be home. I think the Bible is filled with some funny comedy as well. We witness Jacob adopting Manasseh and Ephraim. Joseph received the rights of a firstborn and a double portion when Jacob adopted Manasseh and Ephraim to the son status of founding fathers among Israel's 12 tribes. Because remember, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. The adoption ritual included Jacob's statement of authority, intent to adopt Ephraim and Manasseh, legal gestures, and words of blessing. So we notice an adoption. Don't you love that? I love that. Because we see here, Jacob has a sense of humor. Joseph is saying, "Bless my sons," and then he brings his boys to him. This is the first time it's documented too, where somebody is laying their hands on someone to pray. Jacob lays his hands on the boys, but instead of laying them this way, because Joseph wanted the oldest son to be at the right hand and the second son to be on the left hand, but instead Jacob crosses it and he blesses this way, so that what happens is the blessing of the right hand goes to the second child, and then the blessing of the left hand goes to the firstborn. And so he kind of mixed it up. And then you see the dad, Joseph, going, Dad, no. Your hands are this way. It must be because your eyesight is really bad and you're having trouble noticing who's who, but let me just correct you. Obviously, Jacob was doing it on purpose, and he crossed it over again and gave the blessings that way. And I love that. I think it's so funny because it's such a nod to the divine choices of Ishmael and Isaac, and Jacob and Esau, and Joseph over Reuben. So God's sovereign ways overruled the natural ways of men. That's cool. That's funny. And who says the Bible isn't funny? I love this verse. As for you, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. God means it for good. So believe him. Read his word, which is hearing his voice. It's also straightening a paradigm and shifting a paradigm in your head where you are framed in a godly way. And pray. Bring your cares to him. Pour your heart out to him. He is a safe place. So take heart and don't be afraid. So here is Easter tree, day 10, Joseph. Ta-da-da-da! What could it be? It's a coat, his colorful coat of many colors. Go, 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 Joseph, you know what they say. Go, 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 Joseph, you'll make it someday. Fa la la, Joseph, you're doing fine. You and your dream coat ahead of your time. Go, 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 Joe, 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 Joe. Your art! Do something! Yay! So this is what I did. I drew a picture, and as you see, Joseph, and then the journey, and all of that is what I did. I hope that you spend some time journaling, pondering, having coffee with a friend, and connecting and pouring out your heart. Or maybe you need to write a letter so that you can make steps towards forgiveness and a reconciliation. Whatever it is, I'm praying for you right now, and I know that if you rest in the Lord, he will not fail you. So thanks for joining me today. I hope to see you tomorrow. Bye. Do you believe that God is with you even though you're not feeling him? It's not always an emotional experience. The kind of leader Joseph was, he didn't just give orders, but he was actually involved in the work too. So this is a cue that we can learn from him regarding leadership. How has God used famines in your life? It's funny to imagine Joseph sending his version of a U-Haul in a cart to relocate his father to Egypt. It's a beautiful picture of Jesus sending his chariot for us. Over and over, you see the promise being restated and restated and restated. And I think it's gracious of God to constantly be restating the promise for us because we're forgetful people, aren't we?